The feed is live, Elizabeth.
All right, then good morning, everyone. I am going to start this morning's meeting for the election of officers, so we'll jump right in. Is there a nominee for chair on the floor? Councillor Doherty.
I would like to nominate Mr. Gower if he's open to accept that.
Okay, Mr. Gower, are you accepting?
Yep. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Is there a seconder? I see Ms. McFarlane. Are there any other nominations for the seat of chair? Seeing none, I will close the nominations portions. All those in favor of Peter Gower for chair? Any opposed? And that carries. I will now go into the nominations for vice chair. Are there any nominations? Ms. McFarlane?
Sorry. Hi. I nominate Don Taylor for vice chair.
All right. Mr. Taylor does not appear to be at the meeting just yet to accept that nomination. Just taking a look to see if I'm missing him, and I do not see him present.
I'll resend him the invitation in the interim.
Thank you, James. As it stands, I do not believe that we can accept the nomination for Mr. Taylor if he is not present to accept, as I do not have any correspondence from him stating that he would accept it. Are there any other nominations that we could hear? Councillor Osterhoff?
Yeah, madam, hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I would nominate Matthew McCartney.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCartney, do you accept the nomination?
My only hesitation would be that I'm not super familiar with all the points of order and all that sort of stuff. That would be my only concern. But if
we have a clerk.
Okay, if I was coached, yeah, sure, I can do it then.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for Mr. McCartney?
Sorry, if I could interject, perhaps we should just give Mr. Taylor a moment or two to arrive, and we can revisit this matter perhaps after the first business item. Just out of fairness to the first nominee, if that's okay with everyone.
Totally.
All right, that's not a problem. Thanks, James. So what I will do then is I will turn it over to Mr. Gower to start the meeting, and we can revisit this when Mr. Taylor has joined us.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Welcome to all of you, but especially to two new members, Paul Benfield and Donald Mitchell. It will probably look chaotic for the next couple of hours, but just slowly work your way through. And I would like to formally thank the two departing members whom we didn't mention at our last meeting, William Heineman and Jeremy Sanonge, for the work that they did on the committee. The approval of the agenda, which you have, do we have any changes to that agenda?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councillor
Just a comment. Wouldn't it be nice if we could hear from the new members and just hear a little bit of the past and wouldn't it be nice to get to know them a little bit and just say hi then?
Certainly will. Paul, can we start with you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks. Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. Just a brief background. I was with Queen's University Archives for, my gosh, 31 years. I was the university archivist for the university, and that also included for the city of Kingston, which one was paid $1 a year, but like all of my predecessors, will be quick to say we're still waiting for our or $1 a year. But anyway, I was university archivist for, oh goodness, 2006 until my retirement in 2019. So I am familiar somewhat with the city in terms of its historical record. Anyway, I've lived in the city for 30. Let's see, we came in 1982, so arithmetic was never my strong suit, as you can tell. Anyway, it's I thought now that I'm retired and basically took a year off just to get used to the idea, which is great. And I think I retired at just exactly the right time. I thought it was time to give back to the city, which has been my home and where my wife and I have raised our children, who are unfortunately no longer in the city. But anyway, and so I put my name in and was very fortunate to receive a note week before, saying that I was appointed to this committee. So I look forward very much to working with you all over the next 2 years.
Good, thank you, Paul. And Donald?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Donald Mitchell, and I guess what I would say to simplify it is that I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. So I've lived in 14 different municipalities over my life, including Victoria, BC, Toronto, Oakville, and now Kingston. My practical and academic background is a relationship with theater that's lasted about 40 years so far. And I trained in music, heavily in dance and theater for performance purposes, and for 2/3 of my adult working life, that's been my career as a member of Canadian Actors Equity Association. I also then, when I left dance, which is a finite career, I went into home renovation through a friend who worked in opera. I completely changed careers, strapped on a tool belt, became Dance and Dawn, and worked in home renovation, then eventually in custom home building in Toronto. So I got an opportunity to work with cutting edge technology, and also spent thousands of hours hanging slate, tuck pointing and doing brickwork and that type of work. So I had a background in construction. And then 6 years ago, I applied to be on the MAC committee because of work that I had started in 2012 on behalf of my employer. And I've been on the MAC committee for 6 years and spent most of that time as the vice chair or chair of that committee and working in that work. And the relevancy of that work to this is that I was the project rep on every city planning policy that's been developed since that time over the last 6 years. So I've had a lot of time to spend with the official plan and first drafts of the zoning bylaw, et cetera, and a number of projects like the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor and KP visioning to advocate on behalf of barrier-free advocacy. And finally, even before I came to Kingston for 10.5 years, I've been the operations manager of Sydenham Street United Church, which is an 1850s designated building part 4 and part 5, and the interior is also designated. So my understanding is it's one of few buildings in the city privately owned that have an interior designation. So it's been a learning curve for me for 10.5 years on how to manage that building. And 4 years ago, we repurposed it with a separate not-for-profit charity called The Spire, which actually now manages the community interest in the building with a traffic of about 1,200 people a week in normal times. So those were all the interests that had me, and engagement in the past with the Heritage Committee had me apply as one of my choices for this committee. And I'm deeply honored and have a great understanding of the tradition of people who've been involved in this work before. And I hope to carry that on and live up to their work. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much, Donald. Madam Chair, do you want to go back and complete the elections?
Yes, Mr. Chair,
Thank you.
if that is all right with the committee, we will return to the matter of vice chair. Just so that we can recap for Mr. Taylor's benefit, there are 2 motions started on the floor. One motion from Ms. McFarland for Donald Taylor as vice chair, and one motion from Councillor Osterhoff for Matthew McCartney as vice chair. So first I'll begin. Mr. Taylor, would you accept a nomination for vice chair?
Yes, I do accept the nomination, but I'm certainly happy if someone else, such as Matthew, is willing to serve as vice chair. And I apologize for not being present earlier. I don't know what happened. I could hear your discussion. I could see some of you, but I couldn't communicate. So anyway, I'm glad I'm connected now, and let's go ahead.
We are too. Thank you very much. We'll start with Ms. McFarland's motion for Mr. Taylor. Is there a seconder for that motion? I see Councillor Doherty raised her hand. Excellent. And is there a seconder for Councillor Osterhoff's motion for Mr. McCartney? I see Mr. Mitchell. Excellent. Are there any other nominations for the seat of vice chair? Seeing none, I will close nominations and call the vote. All those in favor for Mr. Taylor as vice chair, please raise your hand and keep it raised so we can count. Thank you. All those in favor for Mr. McCartney as vice chair? Thank you. I see a vote of 5 for Mr. Taylor and 2 for Mr. McCartney. So I believe Mr. Taylor will be vice chair.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, for that. Thank you both for putting forward your names. Matthew, we will no doubt be relying on you many times, and I know Don and I are in constant talking on things. Okay, now back to the approval of the agenda. Do we have any additions to the agenda? There is one under correspondence, I believe. Anything else? And seeing nothing, I look for a mover to approve the agenda. Don't be shy. Matthew, seconded by Don Taylor. Further discussion? Seeing none, those in favour? Those opposed? You have an agenda. The minutes of November the 18th. Are there any concerns, corrections? Anything from these? Seeing none, then looking for a mover, remembering you have to have been present at the meeting. Matthew, sorry, were you about to make a comment? You need to unmute. No, okay. No further comments. So looking for a mover to approve those minutes. Jennifer, thank you. And a seconder. Jane, so you have moved and seconded the minutes of November 18. Further discussion? And yes, Don Taylor.
I think the minutes were very clear, and but I notice the minutes show that there is quite a bit of discussion about some issues that are of interest to us about matters of how recommendations should be framed and sent to council, and how members should respond or carry out their interactions with the community and the media. And I hope we can continue that discussion sometime, but I don't think this is the place. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and we'll keep that in mind for when anything like that comes up or when there's an opportunity. Further comments on those minutes? Matthew?
Yeah, hi, Peter. Sorry, I thought you said on the agenda. You said on the minutes. My apologies.
Okay, on the minutes. Other discussion, thoughts on the minutes? Seeing none, those in favour of approval, you have to have been at the meeting, remember? Those opposed, and so those minutes are now confirmed. Which brings us down to disclosure of pecuniary interest. And as ever, I will make the comment that if you know now, please state. And if you find during the meeting as things develop that you are in have pecuniary interest, please say so then. So does anybody at this point want to state an interest in any of the matters? Donald?
I just had a comment before that we had an addendum, and was that captured in the approval of the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I mentioned that it had happened. It's the note from Don Taylor on information report HK21001.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to raise this at this point in time. I don't consider actually that I do have a pecuniary interest or a conflict of interest, but for the awareness and the confidence of the public, I need to mention that one of the items in the agenda that addresses the old Princess Street United Church and home-based housing. I'm employed by Sydenham Street United Church, which is a separate franchise, if you will, for the United Church of Canada. I've never had any interest or business or conflict of any type with Princess Street United Church as an entity, nor home-based housing. And I would just call it an interest and bow out, but I do think that there is advantage to my understanding of the intangible and the storied history that might be of relation to the preservation of the heritage attributes of the building that I'd like to speak to.
Okay, thank you very much. I think normally in the two clerks we have present can comment that it really is a financial benefit that you would gain from the discussion or from voting on the motion. And I think that you've clearly stated that that is not the case, but thank you for making that one clear anyway. Others, pecuniary interest? And seeing none, presentations. This is where Madam Clerk says none today. Delegations, briefings. So we're at business, the update on the commemorations policy, which is an annual updating. Who is going to give us this? Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. I do have slides, so I think James is probably pulling them up.
Just bear with me. The computer is taking its time this morning.
All right. Yeah, so as Peter mentioned, this is our annual update, which we offer and have offered. Actually, only since 2019, we decided to move to an annual report to the committee. But this is our annual report and update on commemorations that have happened in the city of Kingston over the course of the currently concluding year. And next slide, James, if you can. And it's also just an opportunity for any new committee members or anyone who perhaps has not seen a report like this come to sort of reference a little bit how the commemorations policy and related strategy document are meant to act. So of course, a commemoration, as you can see, is an intentional act around the memory of people, places, events, and ideas. What's really interesting and I think in many ways makes this work of interest to the Heritage Committee is that it can involve all sorts of public and private, national and local, tangible and intangible, monumental and modest, permanent and temporary works. And that's really what you see us capturing in this report. This is not meant to be a detailed report on every single commemorative request that we receive, but I think it does do a nice job of presenting to the committee a bit of a snapshot of the kinds of commemoration that the city is able to foster and support through the policy and strategy document. Next slide, please, James. Thank you. So the strategy document and the associated policy came forward through council in 2015 and is in place to be renewed after 2024. And the purpose of the commemoration strategy was to establish clear lines and consistent and consolidated protocols for decision-making around commemorative requests. And this came out as a response to community and also a response to a desire to, sometimes we call it to better balance or diversify the commemorative landscape. So the strategy and the community consultation that led to it really emphasized that there were a number of thematic gaps within the city of Kingston, where we saw a lot of commemorative act in some specific areas of historic understanding, such as military, but we had absences in other areas of commemorative understandings. And so the strategy has also identified through that community consultation a number of thematic gap areas, including women's history, Franco-Canadian history, as well as Indigenous history, LGBTQ history, et cetera, that need to be essentially prioritized in any new commemorative efforts that the city would be to initiate or approve. And this strategy and policy document, it's important to remind everyone, pertains specifically to the commemorations on city property or that require city approvals. So it does not deal with private plaques that someone may have on an existing or a property that they've worked on. Next slide, please. So just at a high level, we do have 4 kinds or categories of commemoration that we receive and consider through an interdepartmental working group. And some of these don't actually come to the working group because category A, for example, is easily handled by the departments and the policies that govern it. The commemorations policy is essentially an umbrella document under which a number of other documents can situate. So there is a bench policy, there is a commemorative or memorial tree policy. So those do sort of speak to the broader and the overarching commemorations policy and strategy. But those are things that the departments responsible for them, Public Works in the case of benches and trees, are able to implement their policy because it has very clear guidelines about those procedures. We then have category B. So category A for us are those that have very obvious paths or policies around them. Category B involves usually submissions to the clerk's department for administration in the areas of proclamations or flag raisings. This can include festivals or ceremonies of the city that are habitually offered, things like Canada Day celebrations, for example. And then heritage property markers, those or roadside signs, those are often of interest to the committee, as these are the property markers that go onto heritage properties that have been designated. The illuminations of City Hall as well. And then we have category C commemorations, and category C are a bit more complicated in that they often involve coordination of a number of different city departments. They can often at times as well be what we might consider higher dollar value installations and often require a greater degree of community consultation about the content or the intent of the commemorative installation or request. So this can include things like Kingston Remembers plaques, the naming of corporate assets, medium to long-term physical commemorations, and that can include public art, so both short-term and long-term public art, as well as one-time led city festivals or events. Again, significant coordination, large events in themselves that may not be habituated. That's why they're not in that category B, as well as the renovation of existing commemorations. Next slide, please. So what you have represented in this report today then is, as I said, it's a bit of a snapshot of what we have seen at the city over the course of 2020 in terms of new requests. So that is captured in the document in the body of the report. And you see it again represented here. And I offered a comparison to the 2019 requests in the varying categories. And you can see from this that a lot of our requests actually come in those category A, B commemoration requests that are more expediently handled by very specific departments through these kind of sub-policies, if you will, of the commemoration strategy and document. There are those category Cs, which I've presented here. They're at the lower half of this table. We had one category C request in 2019. This was a council-directed motion to consider how to work with the National Wall of Remembrance Association on the installation of a National Wall of Remembrance in the city of Kingston. And the reason that this came forward through a council motion is that it was initially declined through the commemoration strategy, as it did not attend to a priority thematic need that was identified in the strategy document. But of course, council has the opportunity to consider such requests and did make a decision in this case to act outside of the recommendations that would have come through the strategies application. And council then brought this forward as a motion to staff to work with this group. So in 2020, you can see we have had no new category C requests. So those are none of those large, more costly perhaps endeavors. Those have not come forward. And we did see a general decline in 2020 in even preliminary discussions or expressions of interest. And we think that COVID-19 had some impacts on just where the community was thinking over the last 9 months. Next slide, please. The appendix to this document also just shares with the committee a bit of a snapshot of works in progress, if you will. And so what we try to capture here for the committee and through the committee to council is just a little bit of, where are we working and what aspects and items do we have to close? So I'm not going to present them all in detail here. They are Appendix A to your report. But I wanted to sort of show you the diversity or sort of the buckets that are in that works in progress. Because a large number of them are the built heritage plaques, and my companion, if you will, and the manager in policy planning can certainly answer questions if anyone has that about the process by which they're approaching built heritage plaques. My group and team, we tend to work more on these community plaques and interpretive signage pieces. This has to do, as you can see in the appendix document, with finalizing some Kingston Remembers plaques. One particular that comes to mind is the Vicky Keith Rock, which was a donation by Vicky Keith after she swam, of course, and touched base in Kingston after swimming across the lake. And that rock is sort of been waiting to be installed in McDonald Park or any number of other parks that we have considered along its journey. So that's one we're certainly keeping aware of and abridged to. We're working with the team in Parks Development in Engineering Services to ensure that when we have the right space for it, we're ready to basically install that piece. So these are ones I like to offer this annual update and ensure that the committee and council are aware of them, because this can take some time. If we think about the installation of the memorial wall at the Memorial Center in Kingston, that came, it was a tremendous project, and it came at the end of many years of detailed consultation and planning to create a really successful, engaging public space where interpretive history is sort of married into landscapes of experience. And that's really what we're hoping to do when we work on commemorations in Category C. We can certainly drop plaques all over the city, but many people will walk right by them. And that's certainly not what we're trying to encourage. So we want to put plaques in meaningful spaces and places that share important aspects of Kingston history, speak to thematic need and balance, and that also then are actively engaged with by the community. Thank you, James. I think that's the last slide.
Good, thank you, Jennifer. Questions from members of the committee? Matthew.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, thanks, Peter. I have a question, Jennifer. I think it was Category C, like the monuments and stuff. When someone brings forward something like that, are they responsible for also having like an endowment or something to pay for it? Like, how does that work?
Thank you. That's and through you, Mr. Chair, that's a really great question. It can work in a variety of ways. Oftentimes we do see community partners coming forward. Usually they will have some aspect of funding, and part of the strategy does encourage for staff to pursue outside sources of funding to defray costs to the tax base. However, if it is a community request for a commemoration, which is then assessed by the interdepartmental working group and would then actually come to Heritage Kingston, or at least one of Heritage Kingston's working groups through the Heritage Assets or the Cultural Heritage Working Group for additional conversation, we can actually propose that this could be sponsored by the City of Kingston, particularly if it addressed a thematic gap. So annually we do in the Cultural Services Department budget for, at minimum, we're hoping 3, our strategy moving forward would be 3 commemorative works or temporary installations, some aspect of community interpretation and commemoration annually. So there is some budget internally. I should also note, just for everyone's awareness, that staff only have the delegated or given authority from council to act on commemoration requests that are under $50,000 and that can be accommodated within existing budget lines directed for those intents. Any aspect that's brought forward for city funding that's greater than 50,000, it actually, even if it meets all of the categories of what in the commemoration strategy we're looking for, we are required to bring that to council for consideration because of the budget.
Okay, that's super helpful. Now, so do you guys carry an operating like maintenance budget for all the current assets?
Also, and through you, Mr. Chair, an excellent question. So we do carry maintenance budgets for the civic collection, and commemorative works become part of the civic collection on the go forward. One of the challenges we're actually facing right now is, as many of you may be aware, the civic collection, which includes these public objects, has resulted from a number of kind of historic lines of entry for those objects. So we have approximately 78 works, public artworks or outdoor collection objects, which include, as I've said, many of these commemorative elements. These come to us through processes of amalgamation as well as sort of adoption. So what we're doing right now is we're working through our outdoor collection to better understand every aspect of it and how we came in possession of some of those longer term, more historic objects that predate actually the Cultural Services Department or an actual informed strategy for commemoration in the city. I say that because our budgets currently, we do have an allocation, as I've said, for outdoor works, which these usually fall under. However, we are very much aware that that budget is not as large as perhaps it may need to be if we were to respond to every need in terms of the ongoing care and maintenance of these objects. So what we're doing is we're committing over the next 2 years to doing a comprehensive assessment of our legal ownership of all of our outdoor works, alongside of our annual triage assessments of our public works. And what that will allow us to do is actually start to look at if there's anything in our collection that needs to, one, have emergency response for triage or maintenance, but also help us to better identify, if you remember how we sort of qualify objects in the civic collection. It means that some of our outdoor works may not qualify as what we would consider collection 1 objects, those primary objects that we would restore and conserve to exact specification for how they were built and intent. But it would allow us then to actually more effectively use our dollars. Sorry, it's a really long answer, but I think it's a really important question this committee should be aware of, is the complexity of how we balance new works against our kind of fiscal responsibility toward their maintenance and care. And that's in the strategy, actually. We have to approve works based on our ability to care for them moving forward.
Yeah, I just, you know, it seems like there's an opportunity there for the liabilities to outrun the assets, you know? And, you know, so are you guys in that plan that you're moving forward with? It sounded like you said in the next 24 months. Are you hoping to set up sort of like a quinquennial type revision, like review of some of these things?
Yeah, we're expecting, you know, in that work plan, the idea is that we would assess all of the collection, the outdoor collection, commemorative collection, not the works we hold in our actual object storage. So not talking about what we would call smalls yet. We're talking just about those big outdoor objects. And the idea would be that at the end of this, we would bring a report back to Heritage Kingston and through you to council, which I anticipate will propose basically a re-justification of various objects within the collection, which will appropriately categorize them in terms of our obligations for care and ongoing maintenance. And then that will allow us to be more accurate in our budgeting, because we will have a better understanding of what the intent of any restoration or maintenance work is meant to do. So that will then trigger a more effective budgeting strategy for some of these objects. So just to give an example that some of the committee may be familiar with, the Barclay Monument, which is in McBurney Park, if anyone is familiar with the Skeleton Park area of Kingston, we've recently undertaken some emergency repointing work on that monument, and it unfortunately came up after this report was finalized, or I would have mentioned it here. That restoration work, or that preliminary stabilization work, is likely to lead to a restoration of that monument. And that is a monument that right now has the same basic care for it as any other public outdoor object. But I would argue from a collections perspective, something like the Barclay Monument which some have suggested is the first obelisk-style installation in Ontario, has a greater historic weight and significance around it. And so we would want to put more restoration conservation effort into it, as opposed to something that is really memorial in intent, but not artifactual in fabric, if you can kind of follow that. So if you want to stand adjacent to a flag on a flag raising pole, certainly we would value and care and attend to that object, but we would not restore the pole to historic accuracy, because the pole is not the intent of the commemoration. It is the kind of collective experience of that landscape. So that's what we're really hoping to do, is sort of differentiate. When do you have a Barclay monument where the actual fabric of the element needs to be conserved and restored? And when do you have something that is intent to trigger an experiential reflection? And then how can we attend to that? And those have very different budget dollars associated with.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jennifer. That was really comprehensive and awesome.
Donald, you had a question.
I just had a comment and then sort of a request. It was very apparent to me reading the entire agenda, but also this report, that we often engage in a built form way or with a very limited sense understanding. So I was happy to hear near the end when you began to talk about different ways of using interpretive engagement, experience and commemorations. So my comment would be that I know the process, and we don't need to go into it, about how persons of disability and barrier-free type options are engaged specifically on projects and on a larger level. But I just sort of felt as I read the report that I kind of wanted us to explore, go further in terms of how people engage heritage, tangible and intangible heritage, and that we could do it through a wider diversity of senses than what I sort of saw in the report. So the request would be that staff would take that and with MAC and other ways look at, and it could also be very cost effective to the last point. Many of the emerging technologies are a much cheaper fashion than just putting a plaque on a wall or a description on a wall. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes, Jennifer?
I just wanted to thank you, and through you, I just wanted to add, thank you, Don. That's wonderful, and I agree with you completely. Last year, you may be aware, we started a Your Stories, Our Histories community consultation around the presentation and interpretation of heritage within the city. And this is actually one of the themes that was brought forward through that process, was in exploring more universal design and considering concepts of alternate ways. Even most recently at the Pump House, we've been working to pre-COVID, the installation this year actually would have had Braille, but because it's such a high contact surface, it's not something we were able to pursue, but very much that is on the radar. And I think I hope that you'll be pleased to see how that gets incorporated moving forward. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you. Other questions to Jennifer? Otherwise, seeing none, I would say thank you very much. I know we'll see you back before next year, and I hope that the heritage plaques especially, we'll hear from you soon. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, just before we move off of this matter, can we just check in with members of the public if they had any questions with respect to this report? And I am seeing one hand at this time. And Miss Bailey, would you like to speak?
Good morning, committee members, and a particular welcome to the new committee members. I just have a quick question for the presenter. Jennifer, I was in touch with Colin Wigginton about the Barrack Street situation. As for the committee members, I'm sure people will remember when Barrack Street was renamed, or a portion of it was renamed to the Tragically Hip Way. Council made a determination, I think it was 2011, 2012, something like that, that there would be some kind of commemorative plaque or some analysis of what was to be done to honor that. And I know you said in your presentation that you were referring really to things that have happened in 2020, but I see in the exhibit that it speaks to matters that were received back in 2015. So I just wonder if you could just update the committee members in terms of what's happening with that, because I think it's valuable information to know, to understand the context. Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Shirley. I've actually been spending some time this morning just looking through our documents because I did see that communication with Colin regarding Barrack Street. So Barrack Street has been spoken to in a number of ways. One of them was the installation in 2014 through the Artillery Park Aquatic Center of some interpretive elements within the space. But I think the one, Shirley, quite frankly, that when I looked back at the exhibit that we provided, there is actually one that is missing, and I do apologize for that, and I'm happy to update the committee on it now. And that is actually Fort Frontenac and the update of the plaque text that is present at Fort Frontenac. And that has been underway in 2020 to revise that text, which also speaks to the military experience around Barrack Street at its base, but also, of course, the story of Fort Frontenac more specifically. So that piece was actually meant to be installed in 2020. And we have seen some delays on that. But as I'm sure you're familiar with, there has been a lot of wonderful research on Fort Frontenac and what that experience looked like, both historically and moving forward. And then the other aspect would be the Valor District. And I know that Barrack Street is sort of, in some regards, somewhat outside of the Valor District. However, as part of the North Kingstown Secondary Plan, there was a recommendation brought, not really a proper recommendation brought to council, but through that secondary plan, it was identified that there would be opportunity within the North Kingstown area to tell more comprehensive and broad-reaching histories, of which military occupation and relation is sort of part of that working history of that region. I'm not sure if that answers the question per se, but I'm happy to address more if you have more specifics or if I've missed something.
Sheriff, does that answer your question? Silence, I presume, means yes. I don't even have Shirley on it.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I apologize. No, I think that's fine. I think, Jennifer, there are a couple of other things relating to the chart that I'd like to contact you about, but I don't want to take the committee's time today, but thank you very much for that response.
Okay, thank you. Other comments before we leave this? Seeing none. Oh, Matthew.
Thanks, Peter, and through you. Jennifer, another thought came to mind. Are you guys doing all this stuff internally? Like, are you guys producing all these sort of reports internally, or are you guys getting outside help? And what does that procedure look like?
Do you mean reports such as the North Kingstown Secondary Plan, or are you thinking?
Oh, sorry. I sort of like skipped in my head back. I'm thinking to when you're looking to do like condition assessments of these artifacts, whatever they be. Are you guys doing that internally?
We try our best to do them internally as our first pass. My team does include a civic collections technician as well as a curator who has a master in conservation science. Mm-hmm. So we try our best to use our internal staff to make assessments. Every year, as I said, we do an inventory of outdoor pieces and take condition photos and write essentially a condition report for every object that we have. Allows us to track where they're moving through time. However, when we hit our wall of expertise, we do then seek outside support, and we then would request and contract someone to do an assessment or a condition report. Those can be large, comprehensive documents, like we saw perhaps with the restoration of the engine 1095 in Confederation Park across the street from City Hall. That was an incredibly detailed conservation assessment and proposal for restoration. We expect something similar to come forward regarding the Barclay Monument. But then there are lesser works that maybe, it's a 5-page document proposing something specific. We're very fortunate actually that our curator, who has a master in conservation science, actually has a specialty in stone monuments, which in a city like Kingston is an extra benefit. So short answer, we try really hard to do them internal with our in-house expertise, but when necessary, we feel that we need to move outside to ensure we have the right approach.
Excellent. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Seeing none this time then, thank you very, very much for that, Jennifer. It was from information only, so we move on, I believe, to the Delegated Authority Heritage Approvals process. Is that going to be Andrea?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Good, welcome.
Thank you, and welcome to our new members. It's great to see you. We had originally hoped to bring this report in November, but I think this actually works out very well because it gives our new members an opportunity to hear this information as well. So in terms of my presentation, I'm going to go over the basic process for delegated authority and other types of approvals for heritage permits in the city. And then we'll have an opportunity to discuss the contents of the report and its exhibits, which include the mandate in terms of reference for the committee and the code of conduct that applies to committee members. So Vice Chair Taylor, you had earlier mentioned some of the discussion that had come up last month, and this presents an opportunity to discuss some of those items. Next slide, please. So essentially there are three streams for approvals, and I've included kind of in brackets the situation where there is no permit required because it is also specifically kind of outlined. So the three types of approval processes are delegated authority, which means that staff have been given the authority to make decisions on Heritage Act permits by council. So in that case, staff process and make a recommendation, then the director makes the decision, and then annual totals of those approvals are presented directly to council. The second type is a full permit, which is what we generally deal with here at committee. It follows a very similar process where staff process and recommend, but then HK considers and makes a recommendation to council, and then ultimately council makes the decision. And then also emergency approvals are another option that we can pursue. Next slide, please. So in terms of where no permit is required, it's very specifically outlined in the procedural bylaw. It includes interior work, unless of course there's an interior designation, an interior attribute. Minor alterations that can be included in sort of the policy framework under the Heritage Act that applies to a certain property. Landscaping, as long as it's not major, and maintenance, which is on the next slide. Next slide, please. And here's kind of the list of what counts as maintenance that doesn't require approval. As you can see, it's fairly limited. It's interesting to note that inspection is listed as maintenance and doesn't require a permit. But in terms of what you can actually change on a building, it's very little, in fact. Next slide, please. We do process emergency approvals from time to time, and these are really for emergencies. So when we have a situation where there's a health or safety concern for a resident of the building, if there's a chance of homelessness due to issues with the building, if the roof is leaking and it's causing fast deterioration on some of the materials of the building, those are the kind of situations that can be considered for an emergency approval. And when we've issued those, we report them to Heritage Kingston at the next meeting. Next slide, please. So this just shows the basic process for delegated authority. The planners process the application and make recommendations. The manager of policy planning, myself, reviews and endorses that recommendation, and then the director of planning services ultimately makes the decision on behalf of council. Next slide, please. And this is the very similar process with different players slightly that occurs when there's a full permit. So again, staff process and recommend, that includes all of the city staff that are involved. Then Heritage Kingston considers that recommendation and the application itself and makes a recommendation to council. And then at the next meeting of council actually makes the decision. Next slide, please. So the reason why I wanted to point out some of the rather dense language of the procedural bylaw is because it does make the specific language of the bylaw makes a very big difference for how it is implemented. So it's important to consider that specific language. And I did just want to sort of point out one part here in the preamble. It talks here about the municipality consulting with its heritage committee. And that is referring to consulting on the process in this bylaw. But the bylaw itself does not actually include a step to consult on delegated authority approvals. Essentially, the consultation with Heritage Kingston on delegated authority happened as part of the creation of that delegated authority process. Next slide, please. And so this section of the bylaw outlines the elements that can be approved under delegated authority. It speaks to minor alterations, but it also doesn't define what's meant by minor. And it doesn't really give a lot of direction on what that might be, apart from the detailed list of items from A to S that follow. So I think a reasonable reading of the bylaw, minor is further defined by this list of items, and it's quite detailed. Next slide, please, for the rest of the items. And actually, I think it's over 3 slides. One more. Thank you. Yes, there we go. So as you see, it's quite comprehensive, and there's a lot of direction there, which is useful for determining what this bylaw refers to. But definitely there still continue to be questions around how it applies. And I think as staff, we quite often see situations that would make sense for us to be able to process as a delegated authority approval that aren't actually captured in this fairly comprehensive list. So that's something that we would like to continue to talk to the committee about, and potentially continue to refine and update. And the reason why that's important is really in large part for customer service and for efficiency. When we go through the full permit process, it takes quite a bit longer, and it does require a little bit more time and resources to prepare those approvals. And as you know, I've discussed with many members of the committee who've observed that it doesn't, every application doesn't need to come to the committee, because some of them are fairly basic and routine. Next slide, please. And this shows an example of a project which was able to be approved under delegated authority that included items that were listed in the bylaw. And now that's the end of my presentation. I'd love to open up the floor to any comments, questions, discussion.
Okay, members of the committee, questions, comments, thoughts? Don Taylor.
Yes, well, I added an addendum to the agenda for committee members to look at. I realize that we all don't want to labor over legal wordings at this time of the day. But there is an important point that I've been trying to make, and other people have been trying to make for a number of years, and that is the city's interpretation of delegated authority is quite different from that in other municipalities and as recommended by or advised by the ministry. And when the delegated authority bylaw came to the committee some years ago, and I think Peter and I were both on the committee at the time, we were quite satisfied that this is a reasonable bylaw, and we all felt that there was no need for minor alterations to come to the committee. But shortly after, we were amazed, really surprised, to discover that staff were approving major alterations. And that clearly was not in our minds when we approved the bylaw. And, I think that's a continuing problem that has to be addressed, because it really comes down to the function of this committee, whether the committee can be a strong and effective committee. To give an example, well, let me refer also to the council meeting last night. In the agenda, there was a report on delegated authorities in the last couple of years. And if you looked at that, some of us looked at that, I tried to count them, and I think came to, in the current year, 2020, there were 54 approvals under delegated authority. In that same period, I think there were 30 approvals that came through this committee. So roughly 2/3 of all the applications are going through delegated authority. And, that'd be fine if they were minor, but they're not minor. And the one that really caught a lot of people's attention is 168 Wellington Street, which is the former Scotiabank buildings, former Victoria Gray building. That's a multi-million dollar renovation operation, replacement of all the windows, significant masonry work, roofing work, and so on. So that was done under delegated authority. And it's kind of ironic that at this moment, the committee is being asked to comment on an application across the street at 171 Wellington Street. So that's coming to the committee. It's for construction of an awning, or attaching an awning to a building. So that's an example of an application that's coming to the committee, whereas the across the street, that's delegated authority. And, I think that is simply unacceptable. And, in the end, I don't see how this committee can work if we see that the important alterations are being done by staff and the committee is dealing with awnings, signs, garages, and so forth. So I urge members to read the addendum carefully, and this is not a place for continuing discussion, but in my view, things have to change or the committee is in serious trouble. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Don. Andrea?
Yes, thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair, I did want to just respond to a couple of the comments from Vice Chair Taylor. The point is well taken. I actually think there are two applications on the agenda for today that would have been better done through delegated authority. And I think that shows that there is a limitation of our delegated authority bylaw. So as staff, when we go through it, we're very careful in how we apply it. And I also think, I guess I think it would be useful to understand some of the thinking between minor versus major. Because I've heard a number of different thoughts on this, none of which are actually reflected in the bylaw. So if there's some combination of a number of the listed items that kind of come together to contribute to become major, I think that's important for us to work into the bylaw. If there's a tie to a financial component of the work being done, like these are really elements that aren't covered. The bylaw as it stands on its own gives the direction for minor, and it gives it through that list of items, and the items are listed as and items. So that indicates it's not just one or two of them, it indicates that it can include all of them. So for some projects, although there are a number of the items that are listed, those are all able to be processed under delegated authority. And I think it's interesting to consider, like, if only one of those alterations was proposed, I think it would be interesting for us to understand more about why it makes a difference if there's multiple, when each of those individually are minor. I think that would be useful for us as staff to understand from the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Other members of the committee? Donald?
So I have an advantage coming to this, I suppose, with fresh eyes, and it's concerning when you read the background and you have long-standing organizations like the Frontenac Heritage Foundation, and I know the reputation of Donald Taylor or Don Taylor from committee work over the years. And so I spent a little time with this, thinking about this, went back and looked at the original minutes that proposed the bylaw and everything. And as I delved more into it, it really reminded me of a situation that we encountered in MAC. And so I just wanted to raise a few points that the Accessibility Committee had in their work in the time that I just joined the committee about 6 years ago. So one of the issues and I'm going to couch this in accessibility terms, but I think it's totally accurate for heritage. One of the concerns that the Accessibility Committee had was having confidence in the decisions. So I asked myself how the Frontenac Heritage Foundation or Mr. Taylor might have confidence that these decisions are being made correctly. And so we worked for a number of years, actually several years, with Greg Newman and Chris Wicca to draft ways to move forward about this. So what was happening was time was the issue. So we had the time of the applicants, which is the time frame of getting this through in a legal manner. We had concern for the volunteers, some of whom were former city engineers who were literally working almost a full-time job to process all of the city's site plans. There's also the concern for staff time in all of this. So when we looked at that, we drilled down into what became the accessibility checklist. And with the accessibility legislations, there's very distinct parts. So when I read this list of heritage considerations, to me, each of these are very distinct parts. So if we can accept that there's a policy on how masonry repairs should be done, and it's all there, and we can go to with that the committee agrees with staff and the applicants, then we can basically say that that's not one item or in all the items. That's a confidence that we know that that's going to be addressed properly. And so in terms of like the accessibility checklist, the way the checklist is done, we look at that, we know that policy is going to apply and that there's going to be legal compliance on it being applied that way. So that was how we moved through the process to address all the different considerations of accessibility. So my question was, is there clear policy for every one of these items? And does the committee have very clear understanding in their heads, and does staff have very clear understanding in their heads about how each one of these is going to be met? And I know there are variations, but masonry or windows, there may be really clear policy. And then the final piece was that we still encountered issues or problems. So you get a project that is really problematic, like the one that was just mentioned by Mr. Taylor, 168 Wellington Street, and staff would come to the Accessibility Committee specifically to address that project. So we didn't do it in our plenary, and we didn't do it as part of our working groups, but that we actually met, engaged on it, and resolved those issues that way. So I just share it with the committee as a new person that those were my thoughts as I read this report. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Others with comments? Matthew?
Hi, thanks, Peter. Through you. Thanks again, Andrea. That was really great. I totally agree with Don, though, that there's like some pretty significant, sorry, Don Taylor, that there's some pretty significant gaps. And I think that, I thought that maybe, we were getting late on this, but at the end of the day, like it's similar to the other problems we're coming up with before, where I don't have confidence in the fact that there's expertise within the city to make these decisions. And it's not like, it's the same problem we were having before. And I think that until you onboard someone like that, I can't have confidence that, there's going to be the appropriate stuff, like the appropriate decisions being made. Like one thing that didn't feel addressed to me was like how you trigger, like what stream do you take to do a delegated authority approval? And then what sort of mechanisms for accountability come after that? Because in the instance of 168 King, or Wellington, they would, you would give them the permit, and what happens if the scope changes? And so it's honor system, they come back to you, and then who's processing that? Because like the whole reason of the Municipal Heritage Committee is we have the expertise and we're supposed to give you an opinion. And, as we've, acknowledged, and I think you guys have acknowledged from your side, is that you don't have the expertise. So I find that part a little frustrating. Like confusing. It seems obvious to me. And so that part is upsetting, because, as for the awning and, for Don Mitchell, like this, the difference between just creating a policy and the Heritage Properties Working Group is working on like other policies for cladding and stuff, is that it's hard to apply a framework to something that happened over a whole series of decades and, multiple centuries, right? Like it's not a one size fits all. So, like the awning across the street, that's one installation that's on the exterior that's reversible. And like that one installation in scale might not ruin the character and function of the building, but a series of 8 could definitely change the character of the building. And I think it's those having the ability to interpret that. And I could swallow that a planner could do that. But when you're starting to make decisions on architectural features, it's kind of like, well, I should just be a planner then. You should trust my opinion as a planner then, and that's the sort of thing that I would be interested to hear what you have to say about that, like getting the right expertise and then your mechanism for accountability, like once you've already approved the permit. Because I mean, as we've seen before too, in previous years where someone will get a permit and there's no follow-up, so there's no recourse. So it's like more like them ticking the box, So thank you.
Yeah, if I could respond, thank you.
Yes, Jen.
Mr. Chair. So I think a lot of really interesting, important points there. I do want to speak first to the idea of staff expertise. Heritage expertise is a very multidisciplinary, broad kind of group of professions, I guess is how I could put it. So we do have heritage experts on staff with specialized knowledge. We do not have an architect or tradespeople for sure. So we don't have some of the more detailed technical expertise on staff. And I would say that the way that we tend to deal with those is through advice from the committee and of course from professionals that are retained by applicants. So the proposal quite often comes forward supported by those professionals. So I wanted to speak to that because it's not that we don't have skilled staff. We do, just not in all of the various professions. I hope that's somewhat helpful. I'm happy to answer more questions about some of our backgrounds if that's useful.
Well, I totally agree. I mean, yeah, like you can be a heritage planner, go for it. But as you were suggesting, you just said you would rely on committee. But if it's not coming to committee, how am I confident, that the decision is being made through, with some sort of continuity or something that I can agree with, and we are working on policy framework, like Donald was suggesting, so that can help. But at the same time, too, a lot of this stuff's nuanced, and and I think. I don't know. I think this just keeps coming back. I thought I beat this horse so dead, but apparently I can keep flogging it. Like that, if you don't have the expertise, like you can't. It just doesn't seem appropriate. It seems inappropriate for staff to streamline that stuff. And I mean, like it goes up the chain, but it's inappropriate. I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Jane.
Mr. Chair, before we go off this, Mr. McLeod is with us today. He is the acting city solicitor. If he could just respond as well to some of the questions from Mr. McCartney.
And just in a general sense, I'd remind committee that we don't question integrity of members of staff in these matters, and council would not either. That's under council procedural bylaw section 1432. And while I respect, we're having a general discussion, the word expertise is both loaded in general. I think what was explained by staff is that there are many facets to expertise, and there were many, experiences, and training, and professionalism that brought. But it's very rare you're going to find one person or one committee or one group of staff that have all the characteristics we would wish for, which is one of the reasons the model is set up that you have both staff and committee, and the committee is drawn from a wide sector of the public. I myself have practiced in this area for almost 20 years now, and I train other municipalities on how you do municipal heritage law. but it's an open field and it's something that we all recognize we're continuing to grow in. So we just remind ourselves the purpose of this rule is to make sure we understand that we all come to this question with our own interests and our own fields, but a general statement like lacking expertise only gets us so far.
Thank you, Alan. I'll go back to Jane, and then I'm going to ask Andrea for where she feels we should be going from here. Jane?
Oh, great, thanks. So I appreciate the walk through the basic process. The one thing that I wanted to ask about coming out of that was, Andrea, you mentioned that staff process and recommend, and then Heritage Kingston processes and recommends, but I thought that it was a little more collaborative because it goes up on Dash for a heritage permit, not the designated authority, but a heritage permit. And I think that there's some back and forth when we post our Dash heritage comments. So I just wanted to point that out. It's not like staff makes the recommendation, but there's actually some dialogue or information coming from HK prior to the recommendation. At least that's my understanding of it. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong there. And I had a couple of other things.
If I could, thank you through Mr. Chair. So absolutely, thank you so much, Jane, for pointing out that really important step. That is really a critical piece. So, and for the new members, I just want to highlight it. So when staff receive an application that's going to go for a full permit, we circulate it to the members of the committee for comment right away. And that's so that we have the benefit of those comments as we do our processing of the application. So Jane's quite right. It is really more of a partnership in that way. The flow chart in my presentation was more meant to kind of show milestone steps, but it doesn't show the integration that actually happens earlier. So thank you very much for that.
Great, thanks. And my question, just going through this, is how are we ensuring consistency in the implementation of the designated authority? And I guess in particular, the windows policy. It's all about demonstration, documentation when it's for repair versus replace. So in some of the delegated authorities I've looked at, it's repair or replace. But in the end, it ends up being replace. And replacing the windows, to me, when I look at the windows policy, it's replace or replace only when considered when the period window is so deteriorated that even if it was repaired, very little original material would remain. So that to me is very clear. You can't get delegated authority, or you shouldn't, for repair or replace, because that could mean all of the windows in a building are replaced. And that to me is not following the policy on windows, but it does seem to be happening. And so that brings me to something else. At what point in a delegated authority permit do you sort of say, whoa, well, now they found out that they need to do all these other things? And I'm actually going to refer to 168 Wellington Street. So on that delegated authority, there is to be a new opening, a window made into a door, and the other new opening is access to a terrace, I believe. So that to me never would have fit into delegated authority, but I'm wondering when this came up and how that's dealt with during the process. So this went to delegated authority, but then obviously if you're creating new openings, it's not delegated authority anymore. And how do we work with that?
Andrea?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So those are some great questions and observations. I think it's important. I think it's important to consider that the policies and the framework we have treat buildings differently if there have been significant interventions versus when the buildings essentially retain those original characteristics. So in the case of the windows policy, the period windows, they're older windows or original windows, the way that the policy handles them. But if those original windows aren't still in existence, the windows policy does speak to replacement. So if they are later, more modern windows, then that is covered by our delegated authority. And that's a piece that I think I would like to continue to talk to the committee more about and understand in terms of when people are replacing those later interventions, what the expectations are and the requirements are for, are we restoring? Are we trying to create a building that's more like its original conditions? Are we actually just, maybe encouraging that, but what we're really looking for are modern solutions that will maintain the building and allow it to be used? Like, I think these are really important conversations that need to happen about what the outcome is that we're really looking to achieve through some of our advice and work on this committee. Because I think it is important to note that for 168 Wellington, there had been a number of I think most members of the committee would consider them inappropriate interventions in the past, but in the modern era, that the current application is looking to replace. And so I think there's really nothing in our framework that would require them to replace those with like a historical replica.
Andrew, if I can pick up on that, we're looking at the time here, and you've suggested that this probably needs a much longer discussion, and particular time. How do you propose that we deal with the concerns?
I would love to continue to discuss. Certainly, members of the committee reach out to me. When we're not in formal committee, I always appreciate that, and I really value the chance to have these conversations. I would like to continue to have the formal discussions as well, including through, essentially updating a number of our policy documents, because I think some of this direction is there's some lack of clarity and some confusion, but there's also, I think, some of these bigger questions that are a little bit missing, where it's not 100% clear to me what the outcome is that we're all expecting and aiming for. And sort of as we discussed at the last meeting, and Councillor Oosterhoff, you had mentioned this specifically, the idea of the shoulds versus the shalls. Where shalls are something that someone really is absolutely required to do, and then shoulds are things that, if they really want to go above and beyond, and they're looking for that specialized heritage expertise to tell them, how they can make a building more representative of when it was built. I think that's a really, really important piece to consider, where the committee can give a lot of that should direction. But I think our policies really need to cover the shalls.
So are we asking the committee then to read this through carefully, to put their comments down on paper and to send them to you, since it's so difficult to get together at this time? And for you to, before next month perhaps, to have received all of those and put together a collection of the comments, of the concerns, of the good points in the procedure as well, and think about where we go from there?
I think that's a great suggestion, Mr. Chair. I also wanted to say that I think there could be an opportunity for us to have smaller groups of committee members, like discussion meetings, so that we don't achieve quorum. Because that's important. We can't all speak together without it being a Heritage Kingston meeting. But in smaller groups, we can have those conversations too.
Okay, in that case, I put out a memo to members. I'm coming to you in a moment, Councillor Doherty, to think through this, to read through what we've got here, and to come up with the concerns and suggestions and positives and negatives and so on, and send them to Andrea, and we'll see where we go from there. Councillor Doherty, I know you've had your hand up for a moment. You need to unmute.
Thought I did. Thank you, and through you. No, I guess I was wondering if it would be wise to or helpful to set up a subcommittee, and they could then and perhaps that subcommittee could bring some recommendations to the whole committee after they've had a chance to meet and to discuss, because it's obvious you need to update some bylaws or policies.
Okay, no, thank you for that suggestion. I was run into legal problems when we tried to set up subcommittees. So if I'll ask you to send off your comments to Andrea, and then Andrea, if you can come up with the best way of dealing with those, whether it's through a subcommittee, whether it's through all members of the committee meeting at different times. But yeah, there's certainly some further discussion needed on this. Thank you for that suggestion. Any last thoughts? This could go on all day, I can see that. Jane.
Thanks, I appreciate the putting in my last thoughts. I spent a lot of time reading all of this over, all of the appendices that were attached, etc. I guess a couple of suggestions I would like to make, and I'd like to put them out here now. I would like Heritage Kingston members to be notified of all designated authority permits being considered.
Yeah, now you're going to put these in your note to Andrea, are you?
Yes, I am, but I'd also like
she's going to circulate them, so as long as it's not too long a list.
No, it's not. I'd also like to suggest that all information pertaining to delegated authority, is uploaded to Dash. It isn't always there. And the other thing that would be helpful would be that the city planning and development map for heritage permits reflects all current heritage permits, which it doesn't at this point in time. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody I have undeliberately omitted?
Mr. Chair, if we could just ask the members of the public if they have any questions or comments they would like to make at this time. If you could raise your hand.
I see no hands at all.
I do see one, Mr. Chair. It looks like Ms. Bailey.
Something is happening today that the hands are not appearing on my list. Okay, whoever has a hand up then, if you can identify yourself, please.
Hello, Mr. Chair. It's Shirley Bailey again here, and I believe I'm unmuted.
No, not on my list. Anyway, carry on.
There are a number of comments that I would like to make to Andrea, but I think I will try to meet her separately. There's a lot of history in terms of the Frontenac Heritage Foundation, in terms of the building that we've been talking about, the Wilson Block, and I think I really appreciate the comments made by Don Mitchell and Don Taylor and Jay McFarland. So I think this is a really important issue. And if the committee needs to go back to look at the windows policy and the masonry policy, then that to me is a starting point and work forward from there. But anyway, thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more hands?
No, Mr. Chair, there are no hands.
Okay, seeing none. Councillor Oosterhoff, is that your hand? No, okay, sorry. Okay, statutory business. These are all part 5s. So I would remind, and I'll talk with new members later on about that if you're not sure, but major questions and comments have been given through Dash. Staff 226, 228 King. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just wait for James to get the presentation up. And just to add to confusion on process, Mr. Chair, the first application that we're doing is indeed a part 5, but the first part of it, the demolition, is similar to a part 4 in that the committee has a role to play and are required to be consulted for demolition. So it's a little bit of a hiccup in our standard process. Never a dull moment. So this is 226, 228 King Street East. It is designated under both parts 4 and 5. Can I go to the next slide, please? The property is located on the northwest side of King Street East between William and Earl Streets. Next slide, please. It includes a 2-story limestone double house constructed in 1843. Can we go to the next slide, please? And as mentioned, it is designated under Part 4 in 1975, and again, it was amended in 76. It is noted as significant in the Old Sydenham Heritage Conservation District Plan. The bylaw, I've only included a snippet of the description in the bylaw, but it does mention the large garden in the rear, which is the subject of today's application. Next slide, please. This particular building is a small shed in the backyard, one-story wood shed. It's about 2.5 meters by 3 meters, built in 2014. And the applicants wish to have it removed. The owner is hoping to disassemble it carefully and be able to sell it for someone to reconstruct it. But it's currently in the way of their new proposal. So the first application, or first part of the application, is a demolition of this particular structure. Next slide, please. These are pictures of the lane as viewed from King Street and the rear yard. You can see the shed on the far right of the picture. Next slide, please. The second part of this application is an application for erection under Section 42 of the Heritage Act. The applicants wish to construct a one-story detached garage in the rear area and roughly the location of that existing building. The garage is to be 6.7 meters by 7 meters. It's got a gabled roof with dark asphalt shingles, and it's to be clad in a wooden board and batten siding in a light gray tone with white exterior doors and white rain gear. So in terms of our review, we looked at this against the policies of the Old Sydenham District Plan, particularly Section 6, which is the new construction section of the plan. Section 6.2 notes that new buildings are not required to replicate heritage styles, but should enhance the character of the district. Peaked roofs may be considered, and wood siding is acceptable material for cladding. Section 6.2.2 directs one to look at the proportions of neighboring buildings to help influence the scale of new builds. Now, there are many existing accessory buildings of varying sizes in this block. The massing of the proposed garage is similar to the massing of other accessory buildings on the adjacent properties. And in this regard, the new building conforms to that policy. The district plan does not address the design of new doors specifically. The applicant wishes to install a standard metal double wide garage door with a row of small windows along the top and a partially glazed exterior person door facing the rear of the dwelling, both to be colored white. Given the location of the proposed building being at the rear of the property and only accessible by a private driveway, staff have no concerns with the proposed choice of doors. A number of the comments from Heritage Kingston members had concerns about the use of white in the doors and trim. And as I mentioned, the HCD plan does not specify colors. Further, the Heritage building itself has doors and windows that are currently white. So the color on this particular property, in staff's opinion, is of no concern. So in summary, Heritage planning staff are of the opinion that the proposed conforms to the intent, goals, and policies of the HCD plan and upholds the conservation objectives of the official plan and best practices of heritage conservation. We circulated this to our technical agencies. There is an active building permit for this application, and the building officials have provided advice to the applicants on a number of technical considerations. From a planning perspective, the zoning compliance is currently under review, and I understand a minor variance application has been submitted to request relief from a couple of those zoning provisions, and that's currently in process. We received a number of comments from committee members, and they're summarized in Exhibit D of this report. And responding members noted general support for this application. Mr. Chair, we recommend approval of this application. Before you is the two motions. I would note a minor typo in the first part that I would suggest for clarification. Perhaps committee would consider changing the first paragraph. Instead of saying that alterations to the property, perhaps should read that the demolition on the property. And that's the portion of the property that is council's or of committee's responsibility as you are required to be consulted on the demolition. And then the next slide is the number of conditions that we are recommending be associated with the new build. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Let me go back to Madam Clerk and Mr. McLeod if he is there, and just ask on this oddity of a demolition theoretically being under a Part 4 and the rest of that being under a Part 5. Can I go ahead with Mr. Leary's proposed motion? Or do you want me to take those two separately and deal with them? The first one as a Part 4 and the second as a Part 5. Because I don't want to be told later on that we did it all wrong.
If I could, Mr. Chair, the demolition is being treated under Part 5. It's just demolitions are treated separately from alterations.
Yeah.
In that committee has a role to play.
So you think that the doing the motions as two parts in that way will not incur anybody's wrath?
I don't think so.
Well, I've had wrath before, don't you worry. Okay, let's go ahead and try then. So first, I hope that somebody will make the motion to change the wording of the motion to read that demolition on the property as an amendment to the printed motion that we have.
Mr. Chair, before we can go into an amendment, the entire motion will be required to be on the floor prior to that. So perhaps we could just go to questions and comments of the committee, and we'll
go all the way the long way around it. I'm trying to simplify things here so we know what we're talking about, because that's the trouble we got into last week. Okay, members then, can you confirm your dash comments? Any concerns? Thank you very much. Members of the public wishing to ask questions, make comments?
I believe Mr. Potter is here, who's the agent for the applicant.
Not seeing anything on my screen. Mr. Potter, you wishing to speak? You'll need
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, perfect. I just wanted to see if there was anything else that council needed further from me, or if they had any questions directed at me. Otherwise, I don't have much for you.
Okay, thank you. Other members of the public? And not seeing any committee members? Questions, comments, thoughts? No movement?
Yes, hi. I do have a question. The garage doors, they're facing the right of way, basically. Is that correct?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so I would still like to go back to my suggestion to the owner that they might consider a muted gray tone for that large expanse. The white doors on the rest of the property have significant overhangs and they're protected from the elements, but I think that those garage doors, if white and on the right of way, not facing the house, but where there will be a little bit of traffic going in and out for those couple of properties, they might be a lot happier in the long run if they went with a muted gray tone, and it would blend better with the gray tone of the garage cladding itself. So I just want to put that out there again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Other comments, questions from committee? Seeing none. Final comments, committee members? Okay, so let's go to the motion.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it looks like Mr. Don Taylor would like to speak.
Okay, Don.
About the question of colors, it's not a big deal, but I noticed that the existing shed has a gray siding and a red door, and white window trim, which nicely match the main house. And I think the new garage could hardly do better than to match those colors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further comments, then we look for, you've made your final comments. The motion now to be moved and seconded. Do I have a mover for the motion as printed? Moved by Donald Mitchell, seconded by Don Taylor. It's now on the floor for discussion then. It can't be amended or, oh, that's a good point. It can't be amended, can it? Or deferred. Because
Mr. Chair, the clause that Mr. Leary has requested to be amended does relate to the demolition, which the committee does have the ability to make decisions on.
You are getting into deep water with comments like that. I have been assured that Part 5 motions cannot be amended. It is in bold in my instructions. Councillor, I'm not even going to ask you, Councillor Ustav, when this gets to council, what you would do here. I think we've got to leave it. It clearly says may not be amended. And unless Alan McLeod is going to make a comment, I'm not sure if he's still listening. I think I'd rather leave it with the understanding you've got all this on tape as to what Mr. Leary said, what we said. Don?
Well, I don't know if this really is important, but the motion for demolition is a recommendation that the committee can change in Part 5. So I'm perfectly comfortable with moving an amendment to replace the word alteration with demolition.
And it should be, should be demolition on instead of alteration to.
Yes.
James, can you put the motion up on the screen for us, please? Yeah, so that Heritage Kingston recommends to council that demolition on the property, they won't demolish the whole property, demolition on the property with said demolition to include the removal of the one-story shed. Moved by Don Taylor. Do I have a seconder? And I don't have a full screen of people, so if somebody can speak out.
I'll second that. It's Gary.
Councillor Osterhoff, thank you very much. Oh, you do come on the screen when you speak. Okay, good. Move them by
sorry,
Don Taylor.
Elizabeth, my computer is frozen. Can you stop the share?
Good. Okay. So the amendment then will say that demolition on the property at 26 ... with said demolition to include the removal of a one-story shed, and the rest of it stays as is. Moved by Don Taylor, seconded by Councillor Oosterhoff. Discussion on that. And seeing none, we will move to vote on the amendment. Those in favour? Thank you. Those opposed? And on the whole motion, with the amendment, you are voting to support or not support the staff recommendation. Those in favour? And those opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, Ryan, for that one. And we move on to 46 Earl Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once we get the presentation going, I'll get started on that one. Sorry for the confusion on that one. It'll get even more confusing next month where new builds in districts also have consultation requirements under Part 5. So
that's a very interesting. So it's amazing that we've come all these years before we've needed to do that. So so next month's a fun month as well. Okay,
I'll try to walk everybody through that next month. So Thanks. So this application is 46 Earl Street. Can I get the next slide, please? It's on the south side of Earl Street, just west of King Street East. Next slide, please. It contains a 2-story stone building built around 1828, which is attached to a stone row that has frontage onto King Street. However, they are multiple properties. We are dealing specifically with the one with the arrow pointing to it, the 3-bay stone building here. Next slide, please. This building, again, is designated under Part 4 in 1984 and is also under Part 5 in the Sydenham District. It is rated as significant to the district. The building has important contextual and design value, but it's important to note that it is specifically the stone building from the 1820s that is of heritage value and not some of the later additions. So next slide, please. So that takes me into what's before you. I included this picture for context. This is the dormer that we're looking at today, what it looks like from King Street. And it's very, very hard to see down a narrow laneway between two prominent buildings on King Street. So next slide, please. This is an application for alteration under Section 42 of the Act, which is Part 5. There's been an application submitted to change a rear-facing dormer, which was built in the 1980s as part of renovating the upper floor of this building. The applicants wish to change the 4 window openings in the dormer itself. Currently, the south-facing dormer contains 4 window openings, each with a equally sized double casement window. You can sort of see it here. The next slide, please. Shows a little bit. The proposal is to, and you can, at the bottom is a little sketch showing the windows themselves. So you can see the proposal is to infill part of one opening on the far left. This is to accommodate a closet on the inside. And to lower 2 of the windows by about 10 inches, 25 centimeters, to allow greater light into a newly renovated living room. The new windows will be wooden, clad in metal, and it will be a similar crank style casement unit. They're to be a soft green tone, Hampton Sage, I believe it's called, in order to accommodate the larger windows on the 2 on the right. The roof pitch will be altered slightly to create an inset with knee wall that's to be clad in gray metal. And the current white siding on the dormer itself is to be replaced with a gray metal siding. So in terms of our review, again, we looked at this against the policies of the Sydenham District Plan. We note that the proposal relates to changes to a non-heritage addition on the heritage building. The majority of the heritage building, particularly that in which is visible from the street, will not be altered. The policy 5.3 of the district plan is primarily intended to ensure that original openings and roof profiles in heritage buildings are not altered in such a way that they negatively impact the heritage attributes like the building's symmetry and scale. The addition of modern large expanses of windows, for example, particularly if they're seen from the public realm, could have a dramatic impact on the heritage attributes of the district. The existing 1980s dormer with its casement windows is not of heritage value on its own, nor is it visible from the street. The existing rear-facing windows are proposed to be replaced with similar style windows. The proposed alterations will not be visible from the street and will not impact the original stone building. However, it will improve the functionality and usability of the building for the owners, thus providing a viable use for this heritage resource into the future. Section 5.3.3 provides guidance on altering cladding on heritage buildings. It notes that cladding as part of the new addition, quote, should be distinct from the cladding of the existing building, unquote, which we all know is a limestone building. The new cladding will be distinct from the limestone building and will not be visible from the public realm. Staff have no objection to the proposed cladding and have included a condition of approval that requires the provision of details of the cladding to staff just to ensure that the intent of this policy is being met. So in summary, the proposed alterations will have no impact on the character of the Old Sydenham district or any of the adjacent buildings, and we support this application. We circulated it. And this next slide, please, will show a sketch of the floor layout, as well as a sketch from the inside of the building showing the new windows in the closet. So we circulated this to our technical agencies. Of course, there's building permit required, and there is an active building permit in the process. And we circulated this to Heritage Kingston. Your comments are included in Exhibit D. Responding members noted general support for this proposal. Next slide, please. Our recommended motion is before you, Mr. Chair, and we're happy to take questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, can you confirm your dash comments? Anybody objecting that they were not properly done? Okay, members of the public wishing to make comments and ask questions? And I'm seeing no hands.
I believe Ms. Finley is present, who's the applicant.
Yeah. Okay. Committee members, questions? Donald?
I just had I had a comment and a question. My comment kind of relates to our mandate section 5 item F, which is mostly policy related in terms of accessibility, but I just wanted to expand for the benefit of the public and the committee a lens that I looked at this. There's an intangible culture of people activity to the idea that people will age in place, and that there are mental health benefits of the window changes that would bring more light into the space itself. Some people have reactions to what we're all moving to, which is LED lights, etc. And I just think that the quality of your home for many people is a form of accessibility. And so I saw this project from the lens that this was a great improvement, and it might allow someone to stay within the Heritage District who would otherwise have to relocate. So that was my comment and lens that I looked at it. My second point was about the siding itself. As a new person on the committee and not quite understanding, I just wondered whether the choice to allow someone to use metal siding on a horizontal would be used by someone else as a justification to do that in their property, where it might be slightly different conditions and it might be more problematic to have a metal siding. So that was a question for staff. Thank you.
Ryan, do you want to comment on that one?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and through you, the choice of siding, I think the district plan is specifically referencing your standard horizontal siding, the vinyl siding, the aluminum siding that we see on more sort of mid-century kind of uses. I don't like to use the precedent term because I think every situation is unique and looked at very separately from around it. So both this particular product we've seen used on the neighboring building, the Winston. It is a high quality steel siding, so it's not your standard horizontal siding. And coupled with that, this particular location is so tucked away that it will have virtually no impact on the district itself. So with those factors in mind, we're fine to support this. You're absolutely correct in that in some situations, we might have a different opinion on the siding, particularly if it was to be covering a stone or a brick original exterior of a building. So I think that's why those policies are in place. So every situation is unique, but this particular one, I think we're okay with.
Good, thank you. Other questions from committee members?
Mr. Chair, before we continue, I believe Ms. Finley was trying to unmute herself previously when we had asked for comments from the public. I just wanted to bring that to your attention in case
Can we remind people to use the raised hand, because that's the only way I see, because I don't have a lot of these on my screen. Helen, you want to speak?
Are you seeing me now?
I'm hearing you.
It says start my video now. You're hearing me?
I'm hearing you, yes.
I'll simply say that I have no further anything else to add.
Okay, thank you.
I would like this to go ahead so we can move along to get the owner back in the house.
Okay, thank you very much. Committee members, any further comments? Last chance to give your final comments. Okay, looking then for a mover and a seconder. It has not been amended at all, so it's as printed in the agenda. A mover, please. Moved by Jennifer, seconded by Jane McFarlane. Cannot be amended, cannot be deferred. Those in favour? Those opposed? Sorry, I forgot to put my hand up. Those opposed? That then is carried. Thank you very much. And we move on to 104 Gore Street. Would this be you as well, Ryan?
I believe this is Mr. Fisher.
Ah, Mr. Fisher, welcome, sir.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Perfect. All right. So this application is for 104 Gore Street. It is designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it's simply an application for alteration of Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide there, please. The subject property is on the south side of Gore Street in between Bagot and Wellington Street. It is actually one half of a semi-detached dwelling, which is part of 106 Gore Street. Next slide. On the left, you see a photo of the 104 and 106 Gore Street as it is today, or I should say earlier. And below is a photo prior to 2011 when the porch at 104 was currently on. The porch was removed in 2011 by the owner at that time. And the owner now is looking at putting on a partial first story porch to cover the entryway. Next slide. So as I said, the property is designated under Part 5 under the old heritage, the old Sydenham Heritage Conservation District. The building's design attributes include 4-bay windows or 4-bay wood construction. It's hip roof, central balcony, and angled returns. Most importantly, the entryway and balcony doors with simple wood surrounds are located in the inner 2 bays of each story. The square newel posts and closely spaced square balusters contribute to the building's neat rectangular appearance. A hanging balustrade with turned wood spindles lines the porch roof. Next slide. Okay, and as I stated, the original 2-tiered front porch was previously removed in 2011. However, the other half at the semi-detached dwelling at 106 Gore Street still maintains the original 2-tiered porch. The applicant proposes to reconstruct the bottom portion of the porch, which will provide covered access to the residential dwelling. Next slide. As we see here in the concept plans, we see the original porch over at 106 Gore and the proposed porch at 104 Gore. They are the proposed balcony or proposed porch, sorry, is going to maintain the same footprint as 106 Gore and same eave line as well. The only difference obviously is there is no second story. However, they could build in the future the second story, and I will leave it up to the applicant's agent, who is currently part of this meeting as well, to maybe comment on the proposed construction and proposed alteration in the future if the way it's going to be designed will offer that option in the future. Again, the architectural features are going to mimic what is at 106 Gore, and there is no mention of paint color. However, the applicant's agent may be able to provide a little more information in regards to coloring and such of what they're looking at doing. Next slide. So our recommendation that the alterations to the property at 104 Gore be approved in accordance with the detailed description in the application, which was deemed complete on June 8th, 2020, with said alterations to include the construction of the front porch. And that the approval of the alteration be subject to the following, which is a building permit shall be obtained, heritage planning staff shall be circulated the drawings, and design specifications tied to the building permit application for review and approval to ensure consistency with the scope of the heritage permit sought by this application. And also all masonry work shall be completed within accordance with the city's policy on masonry restoration in heritage buildings, and minor deviations to the submitted plans which meet the intent of the approval and do not further impact the heritage attributes of the property shall be delegated to the Director of Planning Services for review and approval. And as a courtesy, there's just a little line here, just for the applicant to be aware that the applicant considers the following suggestions made by the committee members: that the design of the porch matches the existing two-story porch at 106 Gore Street. Therefore, if the owner wishes to have it redesigned and want to do the two-story, we'd be happy to take a look at that, and we prefer to see that construction happen. And also that the paint color of the new porch be complementary to the existing porch at 106 Gore Street. And again, the owner's applicant or agent, sorry, can comment on the paint colors. The application was circulated to Heritage Committee and also to internal, external agencies. There's been no technical comments except for obviously a building permit being required prior to construction. I will leave this in your hands.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Members of the committee, can you confirm your dash comments on this? Any concerns that they've been incorrectly entered? Don Taylor?
Sorry, I was just confirming that my comments.
Oh, okay, you're okay, good. Nothing from else. Members of the public wishing to make comments on this?
Mr. Chair, I'm just asking if Mr. Biggerman, who is the applicant on this, if he would like to make some comments.
Yes, am I on?
Yes, you are.
This is a pretty easy one. No further comments other than the one Tim brought up. We are mimicking what's the client wishes to mimic what the neighbor porch looks like to bring continuity to the building as it was in its historical photo. And as far as the second story goes, we will be framing and building the structure so as that can be accommodated if she so wants to in the future. However, it's not in the budget right now, and she doesn't wish to have a walkout second floor on the property. So we will put the roof on over the first floor as it shows in the drawings. Color wise, you can see in the photograph that there is a light gray trim color package on her side of the building, a darker gray on the other side of the building. That's a conversation I think we've yet to have with her, but it will most likely be one of the two colors, and it will she'll probably end up matching. We'll get back to committee on that as far as which color selected. Will probably be the darker one to match what's there.
Okay, thank you very much. Other members of the public? And seeing none. Committee members, questions? Don Taylor?
I'm glad to have Mr. Wickerman confirm that they're matching the detailing with the existing porch. I noticed looking closely at the porch balusters, which are square, but they're fluted. So have you noted that the new balusters won't be fluted in the same way?
Todd, can you answer that one?
They will be painstakingly detailed to match.
Thank you for that answer, which we've all duly noted. Other committee questions? Donald?
I just had a quick question. I apologize that I wasn't around for the Heritage Kingston dash process, but I looked at the roof and I thought about the almost 8% slope and the evacuation of water, and the question raised about the grading under the existing porch, keeping the water away from the foundation and the structure, whether or not maybe for aesthetic reasons, again, not having been on the committee maybe long enough to know all of this, whether east trough and downspout is an option. If it isn't, there are ways to hide it behind the fascia to match the existing building. But without the roof on the second story and the trough there to evacuate the water, I did have some concerns about the longevity of the soil, et cetera.
Yeah, that's going to be an issue that we're gonna deal with. Right now, it is pretty soupy there underneath that existing porch. So there is a little bit of fall towards the south where her driveway is. So we will channel any water that comes down into a trench drain that goes towards that area of the building. As far as where routing that, rerouting where the downspout is going, it's not on the drawing. It's a good question. We'll have to bring it down somewhere, so it'll likely be down in front of one of the columns, and then into the catchment system, painted the same color and along the side. I mean, I can bring that detail to committee once it's designed. We've yet to go for building permit, so it'll be on the building permit drawing.
Okay, thank you very much. Other committee member questions? Paul Banfield.
Yeah, if I may, do we know why that portion of the porch was removed in the first place? Was there any compelling reason that may, reassert itself this time around, given its new iteration, or?
I believe it was a previous owner.
Just decided didn't want a porch anymore.
Yeah, wanted more morning light, I suppose.
Okay.
Okay.
As it is now, there's a valley that front build out has produced a valley in the roof that drains right onto their existing front porch, which is why, as you can see, I don't know if there's a photograph. Oh, there is one. The recent photograph shows a glass door canopy that was made by a local artisan that she had installed.
Okay, thanks, and thanks for reminding us on that one, Paul. Jane McFarlane.
Great. Yeah, I think this is a really good proposal and the applicant should be commended for that. And I really appreciate the foresight in planning the construction to enable the second story of the porch to possibly be done at a later date. And I'm hoping for complimentary paint, and it sounds like that will happen. Thank you.
Other committee members? Did I see, Tim, you had a comment for a moment? No, okay. Final comments from the committee? And seeing none then, a motion, I need a mover and a seconder. It has not been amended, it can't be amended in any way, so it's as printed. Mover for this motion, please. Matthew, and the seconder, Jane. Those in favour? Those opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much, Tim and Todd. We go on to 180 Bagot. Whose is this?
That'd be me, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
So we move to the next slide. This is 180 to 182 Bagot Street on the northwest corner of Bagot and William. The next slide, please. It includes a 2.5-story brick dwelling built in 1902 to plans by well-known local architect William Newlands. Next slide, please. It is designated under just within the Heritage Act, or within the Heritage District, part of the Old Sydenham District under Part 5. It's noted as a significant building. We included a snippet of the notes in the designation in the evaluation, and it does specifically note the large Romanesque arches visible from William Street. Next slide, please. As heritage attributes, and you'll see it there on the image, which is important given the application before you. So the applicants are currently in the process of seeking a zoning amendment to permit an internal conversion of the building from a doctor's office and an apartment to 3 residential apartment units. So the application that's before committee is in one for alteration under section 42. It's a number of changes. So from this side, it's to recreate a window opening in that current blind window opening on the first floor. I can go to the next slide, please. And this is the rear. The application is to install a new window opening on the second floor on the north elevation to convert an existing window to a door. You'll see the window on the little bump out bay is to be converted to a door. And the door on this elevation is to be converted to a window, which you can see again. And then the deck that's in that photo on the right is to be removed and replaced with a new wooden deck and steps. It's to be in a brown tone with a gray metal railing. And finally, the applicants are requesting to erect an enclosed bicycle storage shed. The shed is to be approximately 2 meters by 2 meters and 1.6 meter tall, clad in wood siding and painted gray. The new windows will be 1/1 sash style windows constructed of wood, clad in metal and painted white to match the other windows on the building. And the new door will be a metal, partially glazed door painted to match. The next slide, please. So in terms of our review, Section 4 of the district plan establishes the policy framework for building conservation. 434 provides direction on the conservation of original porches and verandas. The rear deck is not original. It was added to the building as part of a later renovation. Its removal and replacement with a similar sized wooden porch is supportable and will have a neutral impact on the district. Section 5 of the district plan is guidelines and policies for building alterations and additions. Section 532 provides guidance on window alterations and directs not to alter location, size, and shape of existing windows facing or visible from the street, and not to create new openings that are visible from the street. The new windows on the William Street side, which is what's before on the screen there, will be located on what appears to be a previously filled in window underneath the decorative Romanesque arch. It's noted in the property inventory as a possible previous window. So this installation of a new window is a welcome reinstallation of a previously removed window and should have a positive impact on this facade. Next slide, please. The alterations to the window openings on the ground floor at the rear, the north elevation, will not be visible from the street. Staff have included conditions of approval to direct the owner to, wherever possible, retain and reuse any of the salvaged bricks, sills, and lintels in the reconfigured rear window and door. Is for the window on the second story on this elevation. The applicant has provided a rationale for this window. While it is visible currently from the street, it's not on a primary street-facing facade, but on side elevation. Further, you'll note there's a vacant lot right adjacent to the property on 184 Bagot Street. And some of the committee members may recall a 2.5-story dwelling has been approved for this location, which will be sited very close to the street and should partially obstruct the view of this new window. Now, the primary intent of the policy is to ensure that original openings in heritage buildings aren't altered to accommodate modern tastes and to prevent new openings that could confuse the history of the building. The proposed new window on the north facade will be partially obscured. It'll be designed to match those in the building, but will be clearly a modern intervention. So it is staff's assessment that the window will have a little impact on the character of the district. Finally, we reviewed section 6, which is the new construction section of the district plan in relation to the new structure. The proposed, it is a small structure, but bicycle sheds could have a negative impact on the district if designed and sited improperly. The proposed structure is located on the rear of the building on the north side, partially hidden by the projected bay window vestibule. It will have a shed roof that'll be lower than the height of the window, and there you can see it on that slide there at the bottom. So it will not impact the visibility of the opening on the main building, and it'll be clad in a natural material in the wood. So the new structure will have an acceptable and minimal impact on the district. So in summary, the proposed alterations will improve the functionality and facilitate the adaptive reuse of this property, while not detracting from the heritage attributes and value of the property and its contribution to the district plan. So in terms of our circulation, a building permit is required. So a particular site, just as before we flip by it, this is a bird's eye view to show the location of the new windows on the ground floor and the new deck, as well as the shed. Next slide, please. And then finally, this is the second floor window. Last slide, please. So building permit is currently required for the alterations. Currently, there's a zoning amendment application and a site plan control application that have been submitted and are currently being processed for this change. And comments from the committee were attached in Exhibit D of this report, and responding members noted general support for the application. So before you is our recommendation, Mr. Chair, including a list of 8 conditions. Thanks.
Good, thank you very much. Members, can you confirm that your dash comments were correctly reported? And seeing nobody objecting, members of the public, comments, questions? I think Mac is here somewhere.
Yes.
Do you want to make any comment, Mac?
Yes, please, if I could. Just briefly, I've had a fair bit of experience with this building. About 20 years ago, we converted what used to be a Shriners Club on the main floor to doctor's office. And a few years ago, we severed off the William Street building, and we severed off that lot where the new building is going to be built. And we tried to keep the main floor as a doctor's office. with the new building that's going to be built and the parking behind, it's really very difficult to do commercial space there. There've been a couple of owners and they've had trouble with that as well. So that's why the new owner is trying to make it back all into residential, which I think really suits in with the neighborhood. And the reason really for the changes in the windows and the door on the back side is really access into these new apartments. And the new window in the upper level is to allow for another bedroom up there. So I don't really think I need to go into all the details of what we're doing because Ryan just covered that very well, but I'm here to answer any questions that you might have. And that second story window that we're proposing to put in the north side, it really is, it sits back from the street. And when the new building gets built, it'll be difficult to see, but we'll definitely match the sills and the brickwork and the windows with the other window, and to be the same size as the window that's fairly close to it. So I think it should have very little impact. I'm open for any questions. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Mac. It's interesting. This block used to have medical offices all the way around it, and I'm not sure if this is the last one left, but they've certainly disappeared. Other members of the public? And I'm not seeing anything there. Committee members, particular questions? Donald?
I'm grateful for the explanation about the loss of commercial, because I flag it being in the Heritage District that's a really important part of the culture of the district, and it would be a shame to lose cultural opportunities in that area. But I'm grateful for that explanation. I just had one question for likely Ryan, but maybe for Mr. Gervin. In the report, it says the modern intervention in the window will be without a historic lintel and sill. And then later in the letter to Mr. Leary, it says match the sills and brick detail. And just for the clarity of me being able to vote, maybe someone could just explain to me the new window that's going in. Is it going to look identical to the other windows, or is it purposefully different? Thank you.
I could answer that, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ryan.
But I may pass it to Mac for confirmation. I understand that the window will be designed to match the existing with a new sill and lintel. I understood it wasn't a historic one, but perhaps Mac can confirm that.
Yes, it will be new sill and lintel, but we'll match the details of the window that's just, 10 feet or whatever it is away from that existing window. So we'll definitely do our very best to make it look like it was there.
Okay, thank you. Other committee members with questions? And seeing none, final comments from committee? Oh, you're a good group now. Looking then for a mover and a seconder. It is cannot be amended, so it's as printed. 6 recommendations and 8 conditions. Looking for a mover. Don Taylor, and a seconder, Jane McFarlane. Can't be amended, can't be deferred. I think you've all had your say, so we look for a vote. Those in favour of the recommendations and the conditions. And that gives me a majority. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Mac, and good luck with that one. And that gets us to 484 Albert. Who's looking after this one?
That'll be myself, Mr. Chair, James Barr.
Ah, James.
Let me know when you're ready.
Yep, whenever you go.
Okay, so I do not have a presentation for you here today. I'm verbally introducing the Heritage Easement Agreement that's before us. This is a requirement that's been handed down to us from Council in their approval of the former Heritage permit, or I guess not former, I guess it's an approved Heritage permit, but it was a Heritage permit that Heritage Kingston saw in October and approved, which Council approved in November. For changes to 484 Albert Street and 620 Princess Street. That's the old Princess Street United Church that is proposed to be rehabilitated with a youth-focused development. So this would contain 48 units of transitional and supportive housing, as well as a youth cultural center, youth mental health services, and a retail cafe and skills training center. The original approval that came forward had a requirement that the manse could not be demolished until such time that final site plan control agreement had been approved. And the intent of that was to ensure that the development was at a point where it was proceeding before the manse was being demolished. Council has approved the demolition of the manse with the new condition that a heritage easement agreement be entered into, which is what is before you here today. The heritage easement agreement doesn't introduce any new works to the site. It is mainly a mechanism by which the developer is going to be able to proceed with works on site in advance of the final planning approvals for site plan control. They do have funding that they've received from both the province and the feds that is time limited, which is associated with some milestones. So they do need to start some work on site in order to advance this development to meet some funding obligations that they have before them. Additionally, they're also looking to bring services into the site to support the One Roof Youth Services, which is in the old 2-story concrete brick Sunday school wing at the back of the property, which requires increased levels of water servicing for the site. So they're looking to make these connections now in order to run services into the site for existing aspects that will be maintained during construction and in order to meet their funding obligations. So one other thing to note with this is they do have an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment that are in and submitted and are currently circulated. That will be on a public meeting on January 14th of 2021. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have on the report or the heritage easement agreement. Myself and Andrea are both versed in this topic at this time.
Okay, Madam Clerk, just to remind me, this is part 4.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is a part 4 designated property with the designation for 484 Albert Street.
Okay.
And this, I think there's a section, I think it's section 37 of the Ontario Heritage Act, which notes that a council must consult their Heritage Advisory Committee prior to passing an HEA. So we are here to consult with the...
Okay, committee members, questions, comments on this? Donald Mitchell.
Sorry to weigh in one more time, but as I read the report and speaking directly to section 7, which is the documentation of demolition, and having just gone through the mandate of the committee, I wanted to raise a couple of points because obviously I have some understanding of it, but there is obviously an intangible heritage to this. The manse itself has a purpose that was created for the property that's there. Princess Street is a very storied history. A lot of the smaller churches back in the 1840s were there and made larger churches elsewhere in town. 9,000 churches are estimated to close between 2019 and the next 10 years after that. And these all have real cultural stories and things attached to them. And my concern in reading the easement and the way that we would document the structure is that we're not capturing the other part of the mandate of the Heritage Committee, which was that we would look at the stories and the intangible culture, et cetera. So I just want to throw that out as an offer that we are continuing the use, which I think is fantastic, which is that these are buildings of service to community, regardless of who owns them. And the new proposal has a huge service component to it, and they will build their own story. But I just wanted to encourage the city to consider the area and the site and the location as they document that it might have heritage value going forward. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Others of you who wish to comment? Donald Taylor.
A couple of comments. Obviously, it's important to maintain the designation of the sanctuary, and I'm a little concerned about the ownership of the sanctuary property and the manse property and Batcher Hall. So I'm just assuming that nothing has changed in terms of heritage designation protection for the sanctuary.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can answer that. There is no removal of the designating bylaw for the sanctuary building in Batcher Hall, so that will remain on site and in effect for the site in perpetuity at this time. There is no application or request to remove that designation.
Others? Okay, Don, I'd ask you to take the chair for a moment so I can make a comment. Okay. This is a fascinating one. And we've already talked about the difference between the moral aspect of what the church is doing and our role on the committee in looking after heritage properties. I voted against the demolition of the manse. I now would ask what happens when, having demolished the manse, the rest of the project falls through. I don't see anything in here which says of penalties or anything at all like this. And the reason I ask that is I look at the gap on Brock Street, between 68 and 78 Brock Street, which was Kingston's, at the time, Kingston's oldest wooden frame building, which was dutifully demolished because the developer on Clarence Street had to have access to where he was going to put up a nice new building. And once the buildings on Brock Street were demolished, the whole thing fell through and we were left with a gap. And I have real problems in this going ahead with all these rules, but no penalties. There's nothing to say what will happen. I think, it should be something like the manse will be rebuilt when that government funding suddenly stops. So I don't know if you can answer, James, do we normally have a condition in that way of what happens if the whole project falls through, or is this just standard wording?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Vice Chair. And maybe Ms. Gummo can chime in a little bit if I'm missing a few points, but there are never any complete guarantees moving through a development review process. You can proceed right through to final building permits or to the execution of a site plan control agreement. And there may be elements beyond our control which would see a development not proceed, even if preliminary site works have happened. I think we've seen a few instances, or maybe people can think of a few instances across the province where development has started on something and never been completed. But what will remain in effect for this site will be the heritage approvals that have been passed previously by both the committee and council, and this easement agreement here today, which locks in the vision for this site. So if for whatever reason in the future there is a change that is not foreseen at this time, that change will have to come back before Heritage Kingston and before the council of the city for reconsidered approval. So that's just the main level of recourse that we have going on today. Regarding the proposal of an idea that the manse be rebuilt should it not proceed, could be a tricky one. A, for the purposes that they'll be putting in services underneath the ground and erecting the building on top of that might prove problematic. But B, the building has already been reviewed through the previous heritage permit and deemed to be of a lesser heritage value in context of the site. And that has been approved by council. So at this point, it would be my professional opinion that that kind of condition would a little contradictory to what has previously been approved by the council. I don't know, Andrea, if you have anything additional to add to that there.
Andrea?
Hi, thank you. Through you, Mr. Vice Chair. So the only thing that I would add to James's excellent response is just for the committee's awareness, the city does have what's called a demolition control bylaw. That is helpful for these types of situations, not the specific application. But in other cases, there is that additional tool to help us avoid this when it's residential units that are being proposed to be demolished. And that was some work that our chief building official did this summer to update that bylaw. So that I just wanted to let you know that there is that piece that the city has. Thanks.
And just further to that, I think that was probably part of the original intent of why we included site plan control as one of the final catches for this site, is because we were looking for a mechanism to say we don't want necessarily demolition without rebuild. We want to see this project move forward. And this is why we include these types of conditions with agreements, which is why we're back before you today. And it's modified, so it's not site plan control, but this time it's heritage easement to try and really make sure that we're getting at the end of the day what is proposed. So that sentiment is not lost on us as staff. It is something we keep in the back of our mind as we are reviewing these applications.
Thank you. Returning the chair, Peter.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions, comments? Seeing none, then we need members of the public comments out there. And I'm not seeing hands. So we need a mover and a seconder for the motion as printed on 179 of your agenda, or page 7 of the introduction. Moved by Councillor Oosterhoff, seconded by Donald Mitchell. Thank you. Further last discussion, amending, deferral, whatever. Seeing none, then those in favour, those opposed, and that carries. That brings us down to the working group reports, of which I don't see any. Is that right?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. There are no working group reports
But
at this time.
Andrea wanted to make a comment on the Heritage Kingston Review Working Group, I believe.
Yes, thank you so much, through you, Mr. Chair. So I did want to give the committee just a brief update, because although we do not have those minutes prepared yet for the committee, we have been working, we have been continuing to work very hard on that group. Where we are right now is we've retained a sort of a facilitator to do some interviews and to gather some data from community members, people with experience in the committee in the past, that is going to bring the review working group a lot more really valuable information as we move forward. Myself and Jen are both involved in that group, and we're happy to answer any questions at any time, whether in the meeting or outside, if any members have questions. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Any questions? And if new members, you may want to, Andrea, you may just want to send them a note of what that group is doing. And a reminder maybe to all members if they have comments to make. But otherwise, any specific questions, Paul?
Not a specific question, but just thank you. I would very much appreciate receiving some further background and update.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to do there, Andrea. Thank you, Paul. Other comments there? Okay, we move on then to appointments. And I presume you can vote for yourself on this one. Heritage Property Working Group. Do we have slides for these, James? No, okay, that Donald Taylor, Jane McFarlane, Helen Finley, Ed Grender, and Robert Cardwell be appointed to the Heritage Property Working Group for a term expiring on November 30, 2021. I need a mover and a seconder, except for Donald and Jane, who can't do that. Jennifer moved, and a seconder. Chance to get your name in the minutes. Donald Mitchell, thank you very much. Discussion on that? Seeing none, those in favour, those opposed, thank you. The Cultural Heritage Working.
Excuse me, sorry, I had my hand up and I've been unmuted and I didn't do that. So I just wanted to go back to the Heritage Kingston Review Working Group comments.
Oh, can we do that later on then in a moment? I want to get through these first.
Yeah, you didn't see my hand, that's all.
I certainly didn't. I didn't see it on the list, or I didn't see you move. My apologies. Appointments to the Cultural Heritage Working Group, that Rodney Carter, Megan Kerrigan, Jeremy St. Ange be appointed to the Cultural Heritage Working Group for a term expiring on November 30, 2021. Looking for a mover. Paul Banfield, seconded by Don Taylor. Discussion. Seeing none, those in favour, those opposed. Thank you. And the Heritage Assets Working Group, that Leah Cox, Kathy Carcutt, Barbara Neatby, Jennifer Nicol and Bill Visser be appointed to the Heritage Assets Working Group for a term expiring on November 30, 2021. The mover and a seconder, don't be shy, Don Taylor and Jennifer, thank you. Discussions, seeing none, those in favour, those opposed, we've got a majority there. We have 3 working groups back in order. Ryan, 47 Wellington Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's simply some, well, you know, the property at 47 Wellington that's going through a major addition renovation that came to this committee some time ago. They're currently in the throes of demolition inside and renovations inside, and have discovered some questionable structural masonry issues. So they've secured it. It's nothing to worry about, but they are doing some masonry work on the back of the building just to repair those pieces. And that's what that's for. I believe they're working away right now.
Thank you very much. I don't believe we have any motions. Do we have any notices of motion? Other business. Jane, back to you then. Heritage Working Group.
Great, thanks. I just wanted to go back to what Paul said and Andrea and information about the Heritage Kingston Review Working Group. I would like to get be included on that email that Andrea, or whatever information that Andrea is going to be sending out. And perhaps maybe all Heritage Kingston members could be copied on that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Andrea's smiling. I think that's a yes. Correspondence. Do we have any correspondence, Madam Clerk?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, only that was listed on the agenda, and
the
that
one that's
was
in the agenda.
in
Yeah.
addendum.
Always worth looking at those newsletters. This one from the Ontario Heritage Trust. The next meeting next year, January 20th at 9:30, probably in same Zoomy format. And looking for a mover for adjournment. Jennifer and Councillor Osterhoff. I know you're all, we have to vote on this one, don't we? Those in favor of adjourning? Those in favor of staying? No, good. Thank you so much. Have a quiet, happy holiday season, and we'll see you next year. Thank you all.